Thanks, Paul. Actually, in addition to my role with ESB, I also chair Euroelectric's task force on electromobility. So, in fact, I represent all the utilities of Europe in all dealings on electromobility with the European Commission and the European Parliament. And earlier this year, I've also been appointed by the European Commission as to their Sustainable Transport Forum as the person to advise them on electricity as an alternative transport fuel. So I actually look at things on quite a pan-European basis. The reasons why the European Union are interested in electromobility, fuel security is one issue. The European Union is spending $1 billion a day on imports of fuel, and a lot of the fuel is coming from areas that, as we realised last year, are politically dodgy, to put it mildly. There are also environmental factors. The 2011 Transport White Paper has set as a target for Europe to have the use of conventionally fueled vehicles in European cities by 2030 and to phase them out completely by 2050. And that by 2030, the target is that all European cities should have essentially free CO2 logistics by 2030. I spent last bank holiday Monday with the mayor and his team in Amsterdam. They were having a workshop because the city of Amsterdam has a target to be carbon neutral by 2025 in terms of all transport. And that's cars, boats, everything there. And their concern is that maybe they're not being ambitious enough. And I was invited to participate in a workshop about that. There's the climate change targets that you have heard about. 30% reduction is what the EU has signed up for. And of course, there are air quality issues that, due to transport, that are significant in many European cities. Now, this is a graph produced by the Ireland's Environmental Protection Agency. It's just of the Irish transport greenhouse gas emissions. And it starts in 1990. Now, the target is that we're supposed to, by 2020, get a 20% reduction on the 1990 figure. By the time we got to the peak of the boom in 2007, we were nearly 200% up on the figure, not heading for a 20% reduction. Since then it declined. Since the recession has stopped and growth has started again, we're starting up again. What's happening in Ireland is not significantly different to other countries. Everybody has experienced this. The only thing that has worked to reduce the emissions from transport around the world has been recession. And that hardly qualifies as a policy instrument. But it is the only thing that has put downward pressure on emissions from transport. Ireland's Department of Public Expenditure produced a report June of last year, and I think it's useful because just in case any of us think we don't know there's a problem coming down the road at us, I've just taken some extracts from it. They've said, recent modelling suggests that the costs of producing or purchasing non-ETS greenhouse gas compliance for the Irish Exchequer from the period 2020 to 2030 period could have a cumulative total of billions in the absence of any further policy changes or policy or technological developments. That is, a business as usual scenario. Ireland's Department of Public Expenditure has said that if we do not have policy changes or somebody somewhere else comes up with some great technological development, that it is going to cost Ireland billions of euro between 2020 and 2030 if we continue with business as usual. And their advice to the government was, to put it euphemistically, this could result in the displacement of other government programmes. So as I said, let's be clear, that it's not a question that we don't know there's a problem coming down the tracks. We do. Now, just to turn to the other item, air quality. Beijing has an air quality. Paris has an air quality. London has an air quality problem. In Paris, they have decided to gradually ban petrol and diesel vehicles from the city. London has decided that in addition to its congestion zone, which you'd pay £10 sterling to enter, you will have to pay by 2020 an additional £10 sterling to enter if you have a vehicle that is a pre-2015 diesel or a pre-2006 petrol car. That's on top of the congestion charge. In addition to that, London has 20,000 black taxis, and it has 40,000 private hire vehicles. They are at the moment licensed every 15 years. From 2018, they're going to be licensed every 10 years. And from 2018 on, the only vehicles that can be licensed in London for public hire or for taxis will be vehicles that they expect is zero emission capable. They are not, they're saying that is plug-in hybrids, because the only people who could produce an electric vehicle, a fully electric taxi for them, would not produce it with the turning circle that London wanted. So they can't have a pure electric taxi by 2018. But no diesel taxi will be licensed in London from 2018 on. They're doing something. European cities are doing something about the carbon dioxide problem and about the pollution problem, the air quality problem. Again, just in case people aren't aware, the World Health Organization has commented on the public health aspects of diesel. And they have said that this was in their press release in June 2012. They said the scientific evidence was reviewed thoroughly by the working group, and overall it was concluded there was sufficient evidence in humans for the carcinogenity of diesel exhaust. And the working group found that diesel exhaust is a cause of lung cancer. There is sufficient evidence. It's classed as a class 1 carcinogen. We don't allow people smoke in our cities, but we can kill them out in the streets with air pollution. And so on. The OECD in 2012 produced a report on the health costs of air pollution right across the OECD. Ireland stands out as one of the only countries where deaths due to ambient air pollution have increased. And that is because between 2005 and 2010, we shifted to diesel. Other countries had shifted before that. That's why it's not picked up in the gap between 2000. The OECD says that in 2005, there were an average of 528 deaths in Ireland due to ambient air pollution. And that, in 2010, went up to 713. So according to the OECD, we are killing an average of an extra 200 people in Ireland a year due to the dieselification that we have gone through. Now, at European level, the Energy Union paper of February earlier this year, just to quote a few things. The electrification of transport is important to break the oil dependency and to decarbonise transport. Europe needs to speed up the electrification of its car fleet and become a leader in electromobility. This requires the full integration of electric vehicles in urban mobility policies and the electricity grid. The European Union has passed, and the European Union and everybody has signed up for an alternative fuels infrastructure directive. This must be transposed into national law by the 18th of November next year. And under this, each member state must adopt a national policy framework for alternative fuels for transport and the associated infrastructure. They must include the plan which is the framework. It must include assessments, targets, policy measures necessary to achieve the targets. And there must be just one item I've quoted from it, an appropriate number of electric vehicle charging points and measures to encourage private charge points. That must be in that. So things are happening at European level. We already have one of the most extensive electric vehicle charging points in Europe. Virtually every town in Ireland with a population of 1,500 people or more has a charge point. There's a charge point on all our motorways, all our interurban routes every 50 kilometres. They're the figures there, and we're completely compatible north and south of the border. The most accessible chairman of a German car company, and I'm not talking about anything to do with Volkswagen at the moment, but over the last number of years, the one I generally find shows up at most events is Dr. Dieter Zetsche from Daimler. I have heard him say many times what he said to his shareholders, and I quote here from the shareholders, from Daimler's shareholder AGM in April this year. And he said the EU targeted 95 grams for the year 2020 means that cars have to consume less than 4 litres of fuel per 100 kilometres on average. Such targets are technically and financially very challenging for premium manufacturers such as ourselves. In fact, efficient combustion engines by themselves cannot achieve these targets. That's why we have to electrify our fleet more extensively. And for them, they feel the plug-in hybrid vehicle is the one, and they've said that every 4 months until 2017, they're going to launch a new model of plug-in hybrid. The question that gets asked is, can the European electricity system cope? Well, this is a report that I led. I didn't do the donkey work on it. I was just leading but it's a question that constantly gets asked. And while the result, we published this in March of this year and presented it to the Commission. And basically, the figures for Ireland, for all the countries, are roughly the same. But if 100% of cars in the European Union were electric, it would mean that there would be a 24% more electricity required in Europe. Now, if you consider the length of time to move from 0 to 100% of cars, 24% is very much in the area of business as usual. But on top of that, there is sufficient spare capacity outside of the peak periods on the European grid that if the people of Europe, in their wisdom, decided, and I'm not suggesting they should, just saying that if they decided to charge their cars completely outside of the peak period, you could charge 100% of cars in Europe without having to build a kilowatt of power generation or a kilometre of transmission line. Clustering will result in some issues at the distribution level, but they can be limited with smart charging, and in any event, they are not the sort of problems that should prevent the thing happening. They are very much in the business as usual. Improved asset utilisation. If we get 24% more electricity being used on the European grid without having to build any more power stations, then that would tend to reduce the price of electricity because you're getting better utilisation of your assets. And of course, EV charging can take place to coincide with improved or increased renewable capacity. Now, I appreciate that everybody who favours renewable energy and green economy doesn't favour nuclear energy. And I'm not here to advocate nuclear energy, but just to make the point that for the second year in a row since 2013, the European electricity grid, more than half the electricity comes from low carbon sources. That's roughly split. It's roughly about 27%, I think, nuclear and 27% renewable. However, renewables are growing and nuclear is in decline. And more than 70% of new capacity installed every year, in fact now since 2013, is renewable in Europe. So the European utilities are committed to the idea that by 2050, the European grid will be carbon free. So that's the direction on it. Now, one of the questions we get asked is, if you do move to electric cars, are you actually saving emissions, or are you just moving emissions from the tailpipe to the power station? Well, there is an argument that because there's a cap on what the emissions from the power stations are, that the power sector can't produce any more carbon emissions. So there is an argument that even if you shift, it has to be absorbed without increasing carbon emissions. But even if you don't take that marginal argument, if you look at it, our study, we studied it for every one of the 28 countries, and I've just shown some of them there. But on average, if you consider that the target for new cars for Europe is 95 grams, if you drive an electric car today using the average mix on the European grid, you're down somewhere around 60 grams. That's today, and you're going in a much lower direction. So even we are roughly somewhere considerably down, 40% less than what the European target is for new cars, even driving an electric car today. So there's definitely a reduction in carbon emissions. Now, just to say that there is a global takeoff in the sales, and I'm not going to go into details of that. I'm going to show you just a couple of graphs. All the graphs I'm going to show you are exponential. Yes, they're coming from a low base, but they're growing. That's Norway, a population of 5 million people, roughly the same number of cars as Ireland. The figure there for the end of 2014 shows just under 40,000 vehicles. They passed 50,000 vehicles, electric vehicles, at about March this year. They're going to be up 60 or 70,000 by the end of this year. 20% of all new cars sold today in Norway are electric. The Netherlands, as I'll show you a figure for Ireland shortly, we're roughly where the Netherlands was in 2011. The Netherlands has gone through 50,000 electric vehicles. They have a population of 17 million and roughly 8 million cars, so it's a bigger market. The UK has been languishing a little, but the UK this year, because in the UK they've got their act together in relation to the incentives, in relation to the support, in relation to the creation of an ecosystem. And even they are going to exceed what their pessimistic target was. The UK will be the #1 country in Europe for the sale of electric vehicles this year. And they're likely to kick on from there and be even greater. It's a booming market. That's the situation in Ireland, and I could explain some of the details. We've come out of a recession. It's low, but we're more than half the vehicles, there's only about 1,400 electric vehicles now, but more than half of them have been sold in the last 12 months. So again, it's starting to pick up now that we're out of recession, but we're still at a low base because we don't quite have the whole support ecosystem that they have in other. We've got a lot of good things going, but we need more of it. And just to finish, what I show you here is a figure from the US. The solid red line there shows the first 36 months of back in the 90s of hybrid vehicles in the US. And people think that, well, maybe the electric vehicles haven't taken off. Well, the blue chart, the blue solid line, shows the sale of electric vehicles in the US in the first 36 months, in the first 3 years. So in fact, it's growing at a much faster, electric vehicles are growing at a much faster rate in the US even than hybrids did. Obviously, it's growing on the benefit of that technology and that. So, yes, it's low, things have not grown as fast as maybe people would have liked, but still the growth is positive and it's only going in one direction. So, that's it. Thank you.